I read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. A blurb on the cover of the book reads, "Doctors took her cells without asking. Those cells never died. They launched a medical research revolution in a multi-million-dollar industry. More than 20 years later, her children found out. Their lives would never be the same again." This is a story about several things, but it revolves around these very famous cancerous cells called HeLa cells, which were the first human cells to reproduce infinitely outside of one's body and are used all around the world by scientists. They have been used to create a vaccine for polio. They have been used to see how human cells react to radiation from atomic bombs. They have been brought to the moon to see how human cells react to the space atmosphere, and they are still being used all over the world today to do many things, like test vaccines for diseases, and are a big tool in helping scientists find a cure for cancer. The HeLa cells were taken from a tumor inside of Henrietta Lacks while she was unconscious and going through surgery. She was not asked permission for her cells to be taken and was never informed of what became of them because she died at the age of 31 from cervical cancer. She was a colored woman from the South who grew up in a very poor family in a one-room shack. After marrying one of her cousins, which was common among her huge family that all lived in Lackstown, she had 5 children and worked hard to provide for her family. Besides the story being about HeLa cells, it strongly revolves around how her family felt and dealt with their mother's cells. For most of them, it was a weird concept for part of their mother to be alive long after she had died. Her 5 children were very angry that they never saw a cent of money from the millions of dollars their mother's cells made. The story talks about all the children in detail. However, the book follows the story of Henrietta's youngest daughter, Deborah, the closest. Deborah was Henrietta's youngest daughter, who was 2 when her mother died and went slightly crazy after finding out her mother's cells were still alive. The woman who wrote and narrated the book became good friends with Deborah and felt her story was very important to tell, so a lot of the story was about her. She had gotten past the frustration concerning how poor the Lacks family was and that they had never received money for the cells. However, she was more frustrated that a majority of the people that used her mother's cells did not know where they came from. Most people at the time even thought they came from a woman named Helen Lane. She also wanted to be able to understand what her mother did to help science and people, which was hard because being uneducated, she didn't even know what a cell was. So a lot of the story was about her and her life, starting from when she was a little girl and she was sexually abused by her uncle and beaten by her aunt, all the way to when she was an emotionally wounded 50-year-old who just wanted to know who her mother was. It's beautiful to see how the author of the story is able to help Deborah and learn about her mother together. Discrimination was also prominent in this book. I learned a lot about the discrimination that was going on in the medical scene among colored people in the mid-1900s. Henrietta was lucky enough to have a hospital nearby that would look at colored patients. Although she had to walk across the hospital to the colored section, and the treatment wasn't as good for Henrietta as it was for the white people. Also, Henrietta's eldest daughter, Elsie, was born with a mental illness and was sent to an institution for colored people who were thought to have had some kind of mental illness. Elsie died when she was 15. Later in the story, when Deborah and the author go to the center, it had been shut down a long time ago, but a man there told them that most of the patients in the institution around the time of Elsie's death died because they were being tested on by white surgeons. There's no way of knowing exactly how many of Henrietta's cells are alive today. One scientist estimates that if you could pile all HeLa cells ever grown onto a scale, they'd weigh more than 50 million metric tons, an inconceivable number given that an individual cell weighs almost nothing. Another scientist calculated that if you could lay all HeLa cells ever grown end to end, they'd wrap around the Earth at least 3 times, spanning more than 350 million feet. In her prime, Henrietta herself only stood a bit over 5 feet tall. I like this quote because it shows a big part of the author's purpose in writing this book. Henrietta herself was a very small woman physically and in the mind of scientists that use her cells, but the author put some significance to the barely 5-foot-tall woman by explaining that Henrietta, because of her cells, was much bigger and more important than she came across. She told me she wanted to learn about her mother and what her cells had done for science. She said people had been promising her information for decades and never delivering it. "I'm sick of it," she said. "You know what I really want? I want to know, what did my mother smell like? For all my life, I just don't know anything. Not even the common little things, like what color she liked. Did she like to dance? Did she breastfeed me? Lord, I'd like to know that. But nobody ever saying nothin'. I feel like this quote really capitalizes on Deborah's struggle with her wanting to know her mother, and pretty much all that she knew about her mother prior to the author helping her learn about her mom was just that part of her was living in cells. So I related this book to big idea number three, which makes total sense because without your living systems able to do your job, you wouldn't be able to live, and that is basically what happened to Henrietta, because the cancer took over her body, and all the tumors that grew inside of her prevented her body's living systems from doing their job, which resulted in her death. The book to big idea number four, um, because when Henrietta's regular cells interacted with her cancerous ones, which were the HeLa cells, uh, when they interacted with each other, uh, when Henrietta's regular cells interacted with her cancerous ones, they reacted with each other because neither could live in her body together, so the cancer cells started to take over and destroy her healthy cells. What came out of this interaction was tumors that took over her body. I assume that somewheres in my life I will come across HeLa cells or hear people talk about them, and like like a vast majority of things I come across, I don't really bother to learn much more about it than what I'm told, and the whole history of the thing kind of goes over my head. But now when I come across the word HeLa or even see the cells, there's a whole world that these cells can open up for me that I can share with others. And it's just satisfactory knowing that you really understand something, and what it stands for, and that these cells belong to a woman, that she was colored. Her name was Henrietta Lacks. She had 5 children that each had their flaws, and that she was much more than just cells under a microscope. Yes, I would highly recommend this book. It's awesome. Everyone should read it. Yay!